Okay, now I'll start with the today's talk, clinical approach to myasthenia and myopathy. As you're all aware, all my talks are based on the basics of clinical neurology. Now, how do we diagnose clinically myasthenia and myopathy? Remember in the last class we talked about the myelopathy. So the orders from the brain passes through the spinal cord and then comes to the lower motor neuron, and then the lower motor neuron innervates the muscle through the neuromuscular junction, and ultimately it is the muscle which has to contract and activate. So the motor weakness can be due to anywhere in the line, maybe in the brain, it may be in the spinal cord, in the anterior cell, peripheral nerve, neuromuscular junction, and muscle. So ultimately, it is the muscle which has to activate herself. And this is the most important point. It is something like an electric bulb in your room. So you find that the bulb is not working. There is no light when you switch on. It may be the fault in the bulb itself, that is in the muscle itself. Or it may be the holder which is holding the bulb, that is the junction, neuromuscular junction, or the wiring which goes through from your room to the mains, or it may be the BESCOM in the central itself. So it is something like that, the nervous system also. So we deal with today the neuromuscular junction disorders first. This is the terminal part of the nerve, the motor nerve, and these are the acetylcholine molecules here which are released with the stimulation of the nerve. Now this junction is called as the synapse. So there is no continuity between the nerve terminal and the muscle end plate. So the gap there is filled by acetylcholine, that is the neurotransmitter. So the acetylcholine is released by these granules into the neuromuscular junction, and this neurotransmitter acetylcholine acts on the nerve endings, the muscle end plate, which is called as acetylcholine receptors. So these acetylcholine receptors in the muscle end plate receive the acetylcholine from the terminal part of the motor nerve. So the disorders of the terminal part of the motor nerve, where acetylcholine is not produced sufficiently, happens in Lambert-Eaton syndrome. Acetylcholine is sufficient, but the receiving part of it, the ACHR receiving part of it, is not amenable for the excitation. So that is the myasthenia gravis. We will go into a little more details now. So we first talk about myasthenia gravis. It is no more gravis in the sense that at one time when it was described, all myasthenia patients had a very grave disease in the sense that they used to die of respiratory paralysis. But now, with the advent of ventilators available, patients of myasthenia should never die. So, unless the ventilators are not available when they have respiratory paralysis. So, what is myasthenia gravis? It is an acquired autoimmune disorder where the acetylcholine receptor antibodies are produced. Now, as I said, these are the acetylcholine receptors. This is the acetylcholine molecules which are exciting the muscle end plate. Now, in patients with myasthenia, the acetylcholine receptors are deficient or they are present but they are resistant to acetylcholine. It's something like insulin resistance. So insulin is there, but it is not acting on the end organ. Similarly, here also it is not acting on the end organ. Now, why the end plates, the antibodies are affecting these? Because it is the thymus which seems to be playing a role in the autoimmune. So autoimmune, as you know, is the antibodies produced to one's own cells and they destroy them. So basically, myasthenia is an acquired autoimmune disorder which causes the reduction of the acetylcholine receptors. So even though the acetylcholine is there, the receptors are not there. So this is called as a postsynaptic disease. This is the synapse, is the junction. This is the postsynaptic. The presynaptic is the one which is a Lambert-Eaton, which I will come to later. Now let us see the scenario. A 60-year-old male patient, the wife comes to the OPD and says, "Doctor, my husband is very sleepy nowadays while watching TV or even while conversing with guests." Husband says, "No, doctor, I am not sleepy, but I can't keep my eyes open. After some time, I am okay." Now, this is a typical story of ocular myasthenia, where the patients have weakness of the elevator pulmonaris superioris. Now, asthenia is weakness. Myasthenia means weakness of the muscle. So, the only voluntary muscle in our body, which is most of the time active, is the levator pulmonaris superioris. As long as you keep your eyes open, the muscle has to keep the eyelid open. So if you sleep for 8 hours, 16 hours a day, the levator pulmonaris superioris is under contraction. The voluntary muscle, the involuntary muscle, that is our heart, which doesn't sleep, which doesn't stop anytime. From the time we are born till we die at 80 years, not even 1 minute it stops. So a fantastic organ it is. So the voluntary one is the levator pulmonaris superioris. That is the reason why myasthenia starts with ptosis. The next muscle that is always contracting most of the time is the ocular muscles. So when you open the eyes, you don't keep on staring for minutes together. The eyes keep drifting up, down, lateral and all that. So the next muscles which are getting fatigued is the ocular muscles, which leads to diplopia. So now you understand, overall myasthenia is a muscle weakness or fatigue. So you just extrapolate to the muscles which are active in a particular person. So that is the reason why ptosis and diplopia are the common manifestations of myasthenia. Now, when the myasthenia case scenario 2, doctor, I feel very tired nowadays. I have to walk to deliver goods. I get tired easily and I have to sit for a few minutes before resuming. Also, when I climb 2 flights of stairs, I just collapse. Can't get up, but with a little rest, I am back to normal. He has been given B complex, nutrients, etc., which has not helped him. Sometimes it is confused for psychogenic, because when a person collapses and sits down on the floor, you tell him to get up, he will not able to get up. After 5 minutes, he is able to get up. So you think that because you have prodded him, he is able to get up, but actually it is the rest which makes acetylcholine to act. So the clinical manifestations depends upon the fatigability of the muscles which a individual is exaggerating. For example, a case scenario you see here, a diabetic and hypertensive presented with history of difficulty in walking, talking, eating food, and nasal regurgitation of 1 week duration. This is one of my own cases. So with that hypertension, diabetes, 60-year-old with bulbar symptoms, the diagnosis of stroke was made and the MR's brain was done, which was normal. But then, as I keep telling you, history, history, and history, which is going to give you the correct diagnosis. So, a little more history of the by evening or next morning showed that the relative said the doctor sometimes he is able to talk normally, he is able to take food, and then other times he just chokes, he is not able to drink water. And this is happening fluctuation within a day itself. Then that gave the clue that this could be a bulbar myasthenia. Starting as bulbar myasthenia, he did not have the ptosis and diplopia. So, neostigmine injection was given and he completely recovered. So, it was not a stroke, it was a bulbar myasthenia. Same thing you can extrapolate to various other things. For example, a teacher or a singer. So, after a few minutes, they get exhausted and then the voice trails off. So, they drink water, wait for a few minutes, they resume. But again, it is because of the reaccumulation of acetylcholine. So, in a simple word, asthenia is a weakness of the muscle, whichever is active. So, whatever muscle is active, it gets fatigued and the patient has got motor weakness. So the hallmark in myasthenia is a fluctuating, fatigable weakness. So it is not just fatigue, but there is also weakness. For example, when you get tired at the end of the day, you say, "Oh, I am fatigued." But when you say I am fatigued, ask your hand to keep it up. You can still keep it up. But in myasthenia, when there is a fatigue, you cannot even lift the hand. There is a weakness which falls down. And commonest one, as I already told you, is the ocular bulbar. Now, 50 to 85% will come with ocular symptoms for the reasons which I have explained. What is more important is 60% of patients with ocular develop generalized weakness within 3 years. Now, what does this mean? If the person with ocular myasthenia does not develop generalized myasthenia within 2 to 3 years, he will not get generalized myasthenia in the rest of the life. It confines to only the eyes, which is a good symptom because generalized myasthenia has got a possibility of respiratory paralysis and mortality. But if it is as long as only ocular, the person is safe. So ocular myasthenia isolated will continue in 25%. Limb weakness when happens, obviously more in the proximal muscle. When you examine the patient, because it is a fatigability and weakness of muscle, there is no sensory problem. There is reflexes are very much intact. Now, this differentiates a neurogenic from a myogenic. So exacerbations and remissions occur in the first few years. So suddenly the patient may go into a respiratory paralysis, but after 3 to 4 years, this thing doesn't happen. So it sort of a burnt out stage will come after the period of 3 to 5 years. So on clinical examination, a very important point is that in addition to the ptosis, orbicularis oculi is weak. Is a very important clinical point to make a diagnosis of a muscle disease or a myasthenia. Because you remember, diplopia is due to 3, 4, 6 cranial nerves and orbicularis oculi weakness is due to 7th cranial nerve. Isolated orbicularis oculi weakness cannot be due to 7th cranial nerve. So this combination is very typical of a muscle disease or a myasthenia, and to differentiate between the two, fatigability is what is important. If the patient is asymptomatic when he comes to the OPD, elicit the symptoms by making the muscles fatigue. So either he can ask to look up for 1 to 2 minutes and look for a drooping of the eyelids, ask him to do sit-ups. Nowadays you see that whoever breaks the lockdown on the road, the police will make them to do sit-ups. So after a few sit-ups, the patient collapses and or keep both arms outstretched. Most important is the single breath counting. Whenever you admit a patient of generalized myasthenia, whether he should be shifted to the ICU or not, we usually perform this single breath count aloud. So take a deep breath and count slowly up to 20. If the person is able to do, that means the respiratory muscle weakness is not yet there. In the books, which is written ice pack test, that means you place the ice, rapid ice in a kerchief and keep it over the lid for about 2 minutes. And then after 2 minutes, the ptosis and diplopia both improve. Is it because of the temperature, there is more effective acetylcholine work, or it just the patient has closed the eyes, so it is resting and so the patient is able to do, we don't know. Suppose the patient comes with symptoms. IV hydrophonium test improves dramatically, or you can do an intramuscular or intravenous neostigmine test, which confirms clinically that this is a case of myasthenia. Now, as I said, myasthenia is an autoimmune disease, so we look for antibodies. So the antibodies against acetylcholine receptor antibody is seen in 85% of generalized myasthenia, but only in 50% of ocular myasthenia. The point of ocular myasthenia is it is a clinical diagnosis. Why clinical diagnosis? Because you do an antibody, it is negative. It doesn't mean the patient doesn't have a ocular myasthenia. Then you give neostigmine, patient does not improve ocular myasthenia. then you think, oh, this patient is, or even you do a tensilon test or a neostigmine injection test, the ptosis may not improve. That doesn't mean the patient doesn't have ocular myasthenia. So it's important to realize ocular myasthenia can have negative antibody and negative influence on neostigmine. Then how do you make a diagnosis? Clinical fatigability. So this is very important. Even EMG also, you cannot do EMG to the upper eyelid. You can only do for the facial muscles and skeletal muscles. So even EMG is not possible. So please remember, fatigability and fatigability is the hallmark for clinical diagnosis of ocular myasthenia. Now 85% will have antibodies, AChR. Now what about the negative AChR? Then they found out there is another antibody, muscle-specific tyrosine kinase, anti-MuSK antibody is positive in half of those where AChR is negative. It is something like multiple sclerosis. Initially, we used to say optic neuritis, brainstem, spinal cord, oligoclonal bands, and some of them were negative for OCD. Then they found out NMO antibody. Then they found out MOG antibody. So I think all those who are negative, they are trying to see another antibody. So when AChR is negative, but your clinical diagnosis is very sure, you should ask for anti-MuSK antibody. The other investigation is a EMG. Normally, when you repeatedly, it is like continuous doing sit-up, up and down, up and down. Similarly, electrophysiology, stimulation of the muscle, you will see the muscle action potentials. But in myasthenia, the action potentials becomes less and less and less, no more elicible. It is called as a decremental response. Because I said thymus plays a role in the autoimmune condition. So look for evidence of thymus enlargement. Most of them have a thymoma, not necessarily a thymic tumor. Now, having found a MuSK antibody, does it differ clinically, the phenotype, from the AChR antibody? Yes, it does differ. The females are more often affected, and there is more pronounced bulbar weakness, and very surprisingly, there is an atrophy of the tongue and face. Ocular weakness is rare. So if you find bulbar symptoms in a patient of female patient with, of course, fluctuations, then you should look for MuSK antibody specifically. In MuSK antibody, thymectomy is not indicated. Now all patients with myasthenia must be given a list to avoid all these medicines because they will further cause problems of neuromuscular transmission, and the motor weakness may worsen with these medicines. How do we treat? Acute phase, that is myasthenic crisis, because of respiratory paralysis, the life is at stake, ventilatory support, and all immune mediated diseases are standard therapy, whether it is multiple sclerosis or myasthenia. Start with steroids, no effect, plasma exchange, no effect, IVIG, you may have to repeat again. Sometimes we are confused whether the respiratory weakness is because of excess of treatment with cholinergic. Then in that case, stop pyridostigmine and wait for improvement. Now, after the acute crisis, the maintenance, the acetylcholine, which is released at neuromuscular junction, is destroyed by acetylcholinesterase enzyme. So the drugs to inhibit the acetylcholinesterase will keep the acetylcholine quantity still high. So the commonest which we use, the pyridostigmine, and because the basic problem is immune mediated, so the immune suppression steroids and steroid sparing immune suppression drugs, azathioprine and MMF. Remember, azathioprine, when we start, it takes a few months to become effective. That means till then you have to continue the steroids. Whereas MMF or mycophenolate takes effect in about 4 to 8 weeks. So mycophenolate is preferred. When both of them do not act, we may give methotrexate. Rituximab is the current Gangajan after the steroids for every immune-mediated diseases. We start giving rituximab. The greatest advantage of rituximab is that it is given once in 6 months. So rituximab is the drug now which we use routinely in myasthenia also. Now, what about thymectomy? Well, thymoma is the laboratory where it produces the cells causing antibody production. So, if you remove the thymus, then long-term remission is quite good. So, when you do a CT chest or X-ray chest to look for thymus, if there is a tumor, a benign tumor, you have to remove the tumor because it may become malignant. But patients who do not have a tumor, only hyperplasia, have got better results after thymectomy than those with tumor. Remember, thymectomy is not required in pure ocular myasthenia and also in the other variety of myasthenia. That is the. Now let us come to the one more neuromuscular junction problem. So far we have been talking about the postsynaptic, where the acetylcholine receptors are damaged by antigen-antibody reaction. Now Lambert-Eaton is a presynaptic disease where the acetylcholine production is defective. And in this case, how does it differ from myasthenia? Fatigability is there but not very prominent. Autonomic symptoms like dry mouth, constipation is very prominent. Most of the time they come with coxal muscle weakness. This is a very important clinical sign to elicit. In Lambert-Eaton syndrome, the acetylcholine production is poor, but with exercise and more stimuli coming from the motor nerves, more amount of acetylcholine is temporarily produced, and so there is an improvement in the motor function, muscle activity with exercise, and then it becomes fatigue. So how do we do that? Ask the patient to grip your hand powerfully over several seconds. Now initially he is not even able to hold it properly, and as he keeps trying it, he is able to grip very nicely, and then slowly it becomes fatigue. So that is called as a Lambert sign, and oropharyngeal respiratory muscles are mildly affected. Most often it is a proximal muscle weakness with autonomic symptoms. It has a decreased tendon reflexes. Associated cancer is about 40%. So the idea of making a diagnosis of Lambert-Eaton myasthenic syndrome is to look for underlying malignancy. So the investigations will show that AChR antibodies are not found, but antibodies to voltage-gated VGCC has been reported in about 75%. Now, when you do the repetitive nerve stimuli, you will find that the motor activity will increase. After some time, it gets fatigued. That means the repetitive nerve stimulation causes incremental response, whereas in myasthenia, it is a decremental response. The treatment remains more or the same because this is also immune-mediated, but there is one drug, 3,4-diaminopyridine, which increases release of acetylcholine, is one of the drugs which is used. Prognosis is poor because of most often underlying cancer. The important is that the cancer follows the myasthenic syndrome. So when you diagnose myasthenic syndrome, Lambert-Eaton, you should specifically look for underlying cancer. Now, from neuromuscular junction, now we move to the last post, what we call as a muscle. So it is something like the bulb itself, what is happening. So myopathy, pathy means disorder. Myopathy is a disorder of the muscle. Encephalopathy is a disorder of the brain. Neuropathy is disorder of the nerve. So pathy means disorder. Even in day-to-day practice, pathy is a disorder. Now, the muscles are affected. When the muscles are affected, all the muscles in the body, the muscles which have to do a lot of work are the proximal muscles of the lower limbs. Imagine a person of 70 kg to get up from the floor. He has to lift 70 kg body weight of his against the gravity. So the amount of work the gluteus and the quadriceps have to do is enormous. Next is the walking on the staircase. Again, to lift the body on one leg to the next flight against the gravity requires a lot of muscle energy. and that is what is deficient in myopathy. So, like myasthenia is asthenia, and whatever muscles are active that get fatigued. Myopathy is a weakness of the muscle, and the muscles which require a lot of strength are the one which are the proximal muscles of the lower limb. So you just extrapolate, you can get all the symptoms: difficulty to get up from floor, difficulty to climb staircase, are the very prominent symptom of a myopathy. So the characteristic features is difficulty to get up from squatting. Always I ask the patient, do you use Indian toilet or a commode? If they say they are using Indian toilet, how do you get up? Then they will say that we have to hold the tap and take a lot of support to get up. And there are people who have tremendous amount of motor weakness, and they very apologetically and with shyness they say, doctor, I don't sit at all, I stand and pass motion. Now this nobody has been told in the house. There's a very important clinical point to know whether they are sitting on the ground at the Indian toilet. Suppose they are using a commode. In the day-to-day activities, where do you sit on the floor? Do you sit on the floor to do puja? Are you able to get up without support? So you will have to elicit the history. If somebody is sitting on the commode and now he requires support of the tap to get up, that is also a myopathy of considerable weakness. But the distal muscles are intact, you can wear the slippers and get normally. This discrepancy, please remember, just not difficulty to get up from floor itself is not myopathy or proximal muscle weakness. The discrepancy is that he requires support to get up from the floor, but once he's on his feet, he is able to walk without support. One of my doctor friends, whenever he visits the friend's house or for a party, he avoids sitting on the sofa because sofa is at a lower level. Because if he sits on sofa, he requires two people to make him get up from sofa because sofas are usually at a lower level. He always prefers a higher level stool, or on the chair he will put one pillow and sit on that. So remember, these are the very important clinical points to say the patient has a proximal muscle weakness. You can extrapolate same thing, the upper limb weakness, washing the head, combing the hair, removing the bunion. So these are all the activities which you have to ask, do you have difficulty or not? Subsequently, it may cause neck muscle and dysphagia. But the proximal muscle weakness, these are all the symptoms. It does not automatically mean it is myogenic. It can be neurogenic or myogenic, which you are aware of. Last time we told you about the neurogenic, that is the GB syndrome, the radicular pain. The differentiation between the two I have already told in the last time. Neurogenic, ask who are the other friends of this patient with proximal muscle weakness. So look for other friends of neuro. What is the involvement of the nerve? Tingling, numbness. The patient may have a stressiculation, sensory is impaired. So when you see this clinical picture, obviously it is a neurogenic. Now that is about the clinical. Then the biochemical parameters. The creatine kinase is normal. In myogenic, it is elevated. EMG will differentiate between the two, and the biopsy also will differentiate between the two. So we have clinical, biochemical, electrophysiological, and histopathological differentiation between the two. I'm not going into the details. Last time we have told the neurogenic causes of proximal muscle weakness. Most important is GB syndrome, if it is acute, or it can be chronic, it can be CIDP. Don't forget, last time I have told you about a patient of long-standing diabetes has difficulty to get up from the chair. He has got a proximal muscle weakness. It is because of diabetic radiculopathy or diabetic lumbar plexopathy, and they are immensely benefited with steroids or IV IgG. Don't forget, it's a very common problem. Now, you said myopathy, disorders of the muscle are broadly classified into three groups. One is the inflammatory myopathies, another is the dystrophinopathies, that is a genetic disorder. Third is the myopathies due to systemic and other causes. While dystrophinopathies do not have any specific treatment as of now, so even if you miss the diagnosis, nothing is going to happen to the patient. But if you miss the diagnosis of systemic cause causing proximal muscle weakness or inflammatory myopathies, it is detrimental to the patient. Because always in our practice, we always look for a treatable condition. Of course, to pass your MD examination, we may have to look for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, limb girdle muscular dystrophy. But once you get into the practice, that may not be all that important. Now let us see what are the inflammatory myopathies. That means the muscles are inflamed. There is a inflammation. There is no infection, but there is a inflammation due to what we see now. A 30-year-old farm laborer had irregular high fever for 5 days, followed by severe pain in the thigh muscles and difficulty to stand or walk even with support. No tingling numbness, not a diabetic. So no tingling numbness means it is not neurogenic from history point of view. The clinical diagnosis is because of the painful proximal muscle weakness with no tingling numbness, possibly polymyositis, and because of the viral fever, the most important diagnosis is a viral polymyositis. Sometimes you wonder whether he's not able to get up from seat because of the pain, so you give a dose of anti-inflammatory. You can give an injection overon which reduces the pain, and still the patient has muscle weakness. So then you know that weakness is due to muscle problem, not the pain. Reflexes were normal because in all muscle diseases, till the end stage of muscle disease, the reflexes will be normal. Sensory changes will not be there, obviously. Now, this is a polymyositis, inflammation, but it is not a immune-mediated polymyositis because of the background and a very short history of 5 days. It looks like a viral polymyositis. With a dose of steroids, he improved dramatically. What are the other inflammatory polymyositis? Until recently, inflammatory polymyositis are further divided into polymyositis, that is proximal muscle, polymyositis with skin changes, that is dermatomyositis, polymyositis as part of connective tissue disease like SLE, rheumatoid arthritis or polyarthritis, and the fourth variety of polymyositis associated with cancer. This is just to make you understand that the dropped head, patient cannot lift the head because the extents are weak. So the dropped head syndrome, when they walk into the OPD with the dropped head and they are unable to lift their head, either it is myasthenia, polymyositis or ALS, fatigability, so myasthenia, evidence of upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron, it is ALS, otherwise it is an inflammatory. So the clinical features are like any other proximal muscle weakness. Initially in the lower limbs. Why lower limbs? Because the lower limbs are bulkier muscles and the activity of lower limbs is to lift the body from the chair or the floor or while climbing the staircase, which requires a lot of muscle energy. And then subsequently it affects the upper limb. Remember, all muscle diseases, the reflexes are normal until the muscle becomes so weak that there is no elicitation. Now, what are the investigations of any muscle disease? Inflammatory muscle disease or a degenerative muscle disease like dystrophies, which I'll come to. The creatine kinase, which is intracellular, is liberated because of inflammation and increased permeability of the cell wall, or because of the destruction of the cell, the creatine kinase is increased moderate to high in all these patients of muscle disease. We also do MR scan of the muscle, which will tell us the edema part, the atrophy part, and the next investigation is the EMG, which shows myopathic pattern, and muscle biopsy, which shows the inflammatory changes. So inflammatory myopathy or a degenerative myopathy, final diagnosis is on the muscle biopsy. So viral polymyositis is one which we described, which happens on the background of a viral infection. The inflammatory polymyositis, as I said earlier, it was very simple classification: polymyositis, polymyositis with skin, polymyositis with collagen disease, polymyositis with cancer. But now the present classification is dermatomyositis, polymyositis, inclusion body myositis, and most important, immune-mediated necrotizing myositis. And with the advent of more and more antibodies being detected, anti-synthetase syndrome and overlap myositis. So these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 varieties of inflammatory myopathies. And this is diagnosed only after finding a particular antibody. All these patients have a very similar picture of proximal muscle weakness. In all these patients of proximal muscle weakness, ocular muscles are spared, DTR is normal, sensory is normal. So that will give you an idea that the proximal muscle weakness is myogenic origin. Now, a 60-year-old lady, one of my patients, had a painful proximal muscle weakness of upper limbs bilaterally. Now, whenever the proximal muscle weakness starts in the upper limbs, it is a primary neurological disease, not secondary. Then she experienced difficulty in taking the food, bulbar involvement, then difficulty to get up, and then she developed a skin rash. So the dermatomyositis was the diagnosis. But next day, more history, then we found that she was diagnosed with carcinoma of ovary, which she was operated upon. So this is a patient of polymyositis in relation to carcinoma of ovary. Investigations like all other patients with myopathies, creatine kinase, EMG, and biopsy, and then MRI. These are the standard investigations for all muscle disease. In addition to creatine kinase, aldolase, SGOT are all increased. In all these conditions, a hepatic disease also can cause elevation of all these, but gamma GT is the one which gets elevated only in liver disease, not in a muscle disease. EMG and investigation for collagen, because we have now specific autoantibodies for inflammatory myopathies, we need to look for those antibodies. Now, when you do a muscle biopsy, you have to pick up a muscle which is still actively weak, not the one which is already atrophied or not the one which is minimally affected. So the motor weakness of the muscle is a guide for selecting the muscle biopsy. Usually we select either the quadriceps or biceps. MRI also may help you to know which particular muscle should be selected for biopsy. Now there are a long list of antibodies for inflammatory myopathies. Myositis specific antibodies for inflammatory dermatomyositis, anti-synthetase syndrome, and immune-mediated necrotizing myopathy. So whole list of antibodies, antibody panel is there. You can send this for antibody panel. What is the idea of doing this? Because each one has got a different phenotype and different prognosis. So if you suspect inflammatory myopathy, you need to go through this. Management remains more or less safe because again it is immune mediated. So immunosuppressive drugs, the standard steroid, IVIG, we don't use plasmapheresis here. We use methotrexate, MMF, azathioprine, tacrolimus, and nowadays the rituximab has stolen the march over all other immune-mediated, immune-suppressive drugs. But it is important is check for associated malignancy. In clinical practice, people keep doing creatine kinase during follow-up, like some people do anti-epileptic drug assay for epilepsy. We treat a patient on the seizure frequency, not whether anti-epileptic drugs are higher or lower. Similarly, treat the patient. If the patient has improved in the motor function, don't bother about the elevated CK. That is very important because you don't have to hike up the dosage of immunosuppressive drug just because the CK is elevated. Now there is another type of inflammatory myopathy, that is inclusion body myositis. Typical clinical features. It is late onset, 55 to 60, most often female. No doubt it is inflammatory because the biopsy shows there is inflammatory changes. But the point is that distal muscles are affected here. Most often it is the forearm muscles which are wasted and affected. So normally when we said proximal muscle weakness in myopathy, we expect pelvic girdle and shoulder girdle. But here it is inflammatory myopathy, but the distal muscles are more affected than proximal. Typically there is a wasting of quadriceps and wasting of the forearm. So whenever you find an elderly lady coming with difficulty to get up, difficulty to mix food, and frequent falls because of the quadriceps wasting, look for specific atrophy of forearm and quadriceps. CK may be normal or even mildly elevated. The diagnosis is made by the clinical picture and a muscle biopsy. Treatment, generally it is resistant to all therapies, but we continue to give the immunosuppressive drugs. Now we finished with the inflammatory myopathies. Now we go to time is coming up. So dystrophinopathies or genetic disorders. I'll spend a little less time on this because they are non-treatable conditions and you can read up in the book also, no problem. Dystrophinopathy. People ask what is the difference between myopathy and dystrophy. Myopathy is a disease of the muscle. Dystrophy is a genetically inherited disease of the muscle. So use the word dystrophy when it is a genetically inherited. So it is an inherited, non-inflammatory, progressive muscle disease. Symptoms are same: difficulty to get up from chair and floor and all that. There are various types of dystrophinopathies. You are all aware of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which comes below the age of 5. Little later is a Becker's muscular. Still later is limb girdle muscle. Then there are some new entities called as dyspherinopathies. Face and scapula and biceps is FS syndrome, oculopharyngeal, myotonic, congenital. So these are all various names given depending upon which group of muscles are affected. The common, what we see in clinical practice, is a limb girdle muscular dystrophy, starting in adolescence and with slow progressive proximal muscle weakness. Duchenne is the one which is most devastating. What are these dystrophinopathies? Dystrophinopathies are muscular dystrophies due to absence or decrease of a protein called as a dystrophin. Dystrophin protein is very important for the muscle to contract. So that means without dystrophin, the muscles become weak. Now this dystrophin is a gene product of what is called as a DMD gene, which is located on the X chromosome. So if there is a genetic abnormality, dystrophin production is not there, and so the patient's muscles will become weak. Because it is a X-linked chromosome, the female is a carrier and the male is the one who suffers. So that is called as a Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So you see that dystrophin is also present in cardiac muscle. So that's why in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, they also have a cardiomyopathy. Total absence of dystrophin means severe disease, that is a Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Minimal presence is a Becker type. In both, dystrophin is the problem, which is not there. So just to show you the inheritance pattern. So mother has got one X, which is a disease, DMD, gene defective one. She is a carrier. Father is normal, X and Y. And an affected female continues to be a carrier. Affected female continues to be a carrier, and an affected male phenotype of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. You all know about the theoretical part of the Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Because of proximal muscle weakness, they try to get up holding on to their own legs gradually. This is a typical what we call as a lordosis and frequent falls, a Duchenne type of getting up from on their own legs. And there is a hypertrophy of the calf muscles. Upper limbs will become later on. Genetic testing is the one which is very important. Now it has replaced the muscle biopsy. If you find in the genetic testing there is an absence of dystrophin, then you have made a definite diagnosis of DMD without asking for a biopsy. But of course, before you ask for genetic testing, the CK levels must be high, the EMG must tell us about it, a muscle disease, and then you do the genetic testing. Now, patients would like to know whether the child which they are bearing in the pregnancy, whether the child is developing Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We will be able to tell by doing a prenatal testing, chorionic villus sampling at the 11th week of pregnancy, amniocentesis, and then sonographically guided fetal thigh muscle biopsy during the 18th week of pregnancy. So one will be able to predict whether the child in utero is going to develop the DMD. Becker is nothing but a Duchenne, with a less amount of severity because the dystrophin is their protein but in a lesser quantities. So it comes at a later age group and the limb girdle step further. Now, this is another patient of mine. A 50-year-old obese lady had difficulty in walking and inability to get up from squatting, 3 years duration. She was seen initially by an orthopedic surgeon who got imaging of the knee done and quickly advised bilateral total knee replacement. But as usual, you know that most patients, when you say surgery, they would like to have another opinion, till somebody says you don't need surgery. So they always look for a doctor who agrees with their diagnosis. So here the orthopedic surgeon had a doubt whether it is really osteoarthritis or something else. The clinical examination showed no evidence of pain in the knee joint. When you do a passive movement, full flexion of the knee is quite normal without pain. There is no swelling, no pain. So obviously it is not the pain which is causing the problem. Most often patients do have osteoarthritis. They have difficulty to get up from the toilet seat. Why? There is a pain in the knee joint. Pain in the knee joint. Now, this patient did not have a pain, but all the same had a difficulty. So this patient had a definite proximal muscle weakness with a waddling gait, which is common for both osteoarthritis and proximal muscle. Now, the diagnosis is made by CK and EMG. The diagnosis is a limb girdle muscular dystrophy, and an unnecessary surgery has been avoided. So, what is the message? Message is clinical diagnosis, not the imaging. All dystrophinopathies, at one time we said no treatment, and the general practitioner used to give steroids. We used to deride them. How can you give steroids? After all, it is a genetically inherited. There is no treatment available. But today, steroid is the #1 first-line therapy in all these patients. So we start oral corticosteroids in DMD. It definitely increases the duration of mobility. Usually by the age of 12, they become wheelchair bound. But when you give steroids in a smaller dose continuously, their mobility continues to improve. For your information, there is a new drug which is called as eteplirsen, which has been found to be effective in a particular type of DMD, not all DMDs, in a particular type of DMDs, and which is still undergoing a clinical trial. And in India, there are only 3 centers where this clinical trial is going on. One of them is by my colleague, pediatric urologist at Sagar Hospital. Recently, she had called all the patients, and it is a clinical trial going on. In abroad, they have already started marketing it, and the price is $300,000 per patient per year. But in spite of such a heavy amount, already the company has made $87 million in first 3 months of this year. I will skip this myotonic dystrophy because I want to emphasize the last part. So we finished with inflammatory myopathies, which are all treatable conditions. We finished with dystrophinopathies, which are genetic disorder, more of an academic interest, less help to the patient, except the DMD, which is going on now. Then we come to the myopathies due to systemic cause. Now, very important to differentiate. Somebody comes with proximal muscle weakness. We are differentiated from neurogenic from myogenic because it is not neurogenic because reflexes are absent, no tingling numbness, no sensory level, and patient has got proximal muscle weakness. So we have concluded it is a primary muscle disease. And the important thing is the large bulky muscles are the one which are always affected in primary muscle disease of systemic cause. Systemic cause. You remember one of the patients had a proximal muscle weakness starting in upper limb. If the symptoms are starting in upper limb, it is not a systemic cause, it is a primary muscle disease. It always starts in lower limb. The CK is mildly elevated or even normal. DMG may be mildly abnormal. The histopathology are non-specific. When you see the patient has proximal muscle weakness of considerable severity, CK is not that elevated, EMG is not very characteristic, then you look for the symptomatic causes. Commonest is vitamin D deficiency, B12 and hypothyroid. So every patient with a proximal muscle weakness, when it is not fitting into the primary muscle disease, look for a eminently treatable condition. These are all the list of systemic causes where the patient may manifest with proximal muscle weakness. Diabetes, there is a diabetic myopathy in addition to diabetic radiculopathy. All endocrine disorders, hypo and hyperthyroid, hypo and hyperadrenal, hyperparathyroidism, very commonly B12 and vitamin D. We'll come to the statin myopathy and other drugs and chronic alcoholism. This group of disorders are eminently treatable. Please do not miss. Missing a treatable disorder is not good. Not diagnosing an untreatable disorder doesn't matter. Let somebody diagnose, let them get credit, doesn't matter. But you have not missed a treatable disorder. So please, in all our medicine, we have a list of treatable disorders and see whether you have checked everything and then said, okay, this is a non-treatable degenerative disease. Now, 50-year-old male, 50-year-old female, slow progressive story of pain in low back, 6 months duration, pain over thighs, difficulty to get up from Indian toilet, and later from chair for 2 months. Obviously, in view of the low back pain, an MR lumbar spine was done, which was fortunately normal. It did not show disc prolapse, otherwise she would have undergone surgery. Clinical examination showed proximal muscle weakness because she could not get up from the chair. But with brisk knee reflex and a pelvic squeeze, you squeeze the pelvis, patient has severe pain. Two important clinical points: brisk knee reflex. So, why should a patient have a brisk knee reflex without upper motor neuron signs? Only knee reflex, not ankle. The squeeze is very painful. So, it is a painful proximal muscle weakness with a brisk knee reflex, is a diagnostic of osteomalacic myopathy. The CK is normal, get calcium, vitamin D. Alkaline phosphatase is very much increased, which gives you a clue. There is no need for EMG. Give injectable vitamin D followed by oral. The patient improves dramatically. So these are the clinical features: proximal muscle weakness, only lower limbs. They will never get upper limb weakness. Pelvic bone squeezing gives rise to pain, and CPK, EMG, muscle biopsy are marginally abnormal. The amount of patient has weakness. It does not commensurate with the EMG findings or with the CPK levels. And remarkable recovery. As you all know that most of us have low vitamin D and low vitamin B12, but what you find in the lab report, is it applicable to the given patient? You will have to decide clinically. Now, this is a very important statin-induced myopathy. Nowadays, everybody is on statin. Even though there is cholesterol levels are not high, people are taking statin. This is a multi-billion-dollar business, statins. 10% of them develop myopathy, but a good number of them develop pain in the thigh muscles, fatigability and cramps. These are very common: myalgia, fatigue and cramps. Myopathy, typical proximal muscle weakness up to 10%. It is due to myositis. You will find, how will you diagnose? Patient is on statin, patient has a proximal muscle weakness with myalgia, cramps. CK is elevated more than 10 times. This is a very important lab investigation to conclude statin-induced myopathy because of the myositis. The CK is elevated, EMG, muscle biopsy, all are normal. Treatment: remove the offending agent, stop statin. Recovery may take 2 to 3 months, not dramatic one, but you still want lipid-lowering drugs. You can use another statin or a non-statin lipid-lowering agent. Pravastatin, fluvastatin are less likely to cause myopathy. Simvastatin most likely to cause myopathy. So ideally, a non-statin lipid lowering agent is better. And lastly, another 2 slides. Polymyalgia rheumaticum. In clinical practice, this is very common. Patient has multiple pains in the muscle as well as in the joint. It is a relatively common chronic inflammatory condition. Patients are all above the age of 50. Pain and stiffness of shoulder, low back and lower limbs. Characteristically, morning stiffness. When they get up in the morning, they say that they can't flex the fingers and they can't lift the shoulder, they can't get up from the seat, they feel pain. And the confirmation for inflammatory condition is a ESR which is above 50 millimeters. Some of them have associated temporal arteritis or giant cell arteritis. Now, with this, clinical examination will not show anything specific. It's only on the history, morning stiffness, morning more pain, affecting upper and lower limbs. Patient is really in problem. ESR is above 50 mm. So you have made a clinical diagnosis. It could be polymyalgia. The therapeutic test is a small dose of steroids, 20 to 30 milligrams. Within 48 hours, the patient is absolutely asymptomatic. So it is a therapeutic test for diagnosis of polymyalgia. Then we have to slowly taper off the steroids over a period of time. Though this is not concerned with the myopathies and the muscular dystrophies and myopathies and the myasthenia, is just another important condition which is called as hypokalemic periodic paralysis. It's a electrolyte disturbance which is an autosomal dominant. There is episodes of muscle weakness. So you may mistake this for myasthenia, triggered by carbohydrate-rich meal. So the previous night went to a 5-star hotel where there is a large spread of meal, buffet dinner is there. So the patient has carbohydrates, gulab jamun, sweets, ice cream and all that. Next day morning, he wants to get up and go to the office. He just cannot move out of the bed. He's tremendously agitated. He thought now his life is over because he has got paralysis of all 4 limbs. And after struggling, slowly he is able to get up. With difficulty and support, he goes to the bathroom and comes back. By the time he comes to the OPD, he's slightly improved. So the first thing you have to do is check electrolytes for potassium and look for ECG changes of hypokalemia. This is the clue for diagnosis, which should be done when the patient has symptoms. In the asymptomatic stage, this won't show it. Remember, any investigation will give you the idea of the underlying disease when the patient has a problem. In the intervening period, when the patient is asymptomatic, we may not be able to clinch the diagnosis. Even in patients with, for example, muscular dystrophy or a chronic polymyositis, the disease goes into a quiescent phase and then again it gets activated. Now, if you say the patient says that for the last 3 months, he has not become worse, that means clinically the disease is not active. Last 3 months he has not become worse. Clinically the disease is not active. So CK may be normal in chronic polymyositis or even in limb girdle muscular dystrophy. But if the patient says, doctor, last month I was able to get up from a high stool, but this month I cannot get up, the disease is active, so CK must be increased. So similarly here, you have to do potassium and ECG when the patient has a problem. If there is no recovery, with oral potassium we give every 3 hours. If there is no recovery, you can give IV potassium, but IV potassium in mannitol and not in glucose, because if you give glucose and potassium together, the potassium is driven intracellularly. So the hypokalemia continues. So it's an important clinical point that when you resort to IV potassium, it should be in the mannitol solution. Now, how do we prevent if a patient has a recurrent episodes? Patient says every month he gets about 2 episodes. Okay, don't go to the 5-star hotel or a marriage meal and then eat heavily and heartily. Avoid strenuous exercise. Acetazolamide, 250 mg, 1 to 3 tablets per day, may be given in those patients who have frequent episodes.